video is about why marijuana is bad for you, despite a lot of media input to the contrary. In women of reproductive age, cannabis, or marijuana, is the most commonly used recreational drug, and the use of cannabis during pregnancy is on the rise. According to research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, there has been a significant increase in the use of marijuana among pregnant women over the last decade. Among all pregnant women, the prevalence of marijuana use increased from 2.37% in 2002 to 3.85% in 2014. Marijuana use was the highest in women aged 18 to 25, with past month prevalence reaching 7.47% in 2014. This data reflects an overall increase in the use of marijuana among Americans. Over the last decade, marijuana use among U.S. adults has more than doubled, as many states have legalized marijuana use and attitudes towards marijuana have become more permissive, with 2 out of 3 Americans supporting full legalization. But just because marijuana is legal or can be medically prescribed doesn't mean that it is safe. It's often considered to be a relatively benign substance, and American popular culture downplays its effect. But we have data to indicate that the developing fetus may be particularly vulnerable to its effects, even with secondhand smoke. Preliminary data indicating a spectrum of risks to the fetus related to maternal marijuana use, including increased risk of growth restriction, low birth weight, stillbirth, cognitive delays and deficits, and poor executive functioning appears. In a study by the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, scientists examined the relationship between maternal cannabis use and fetal growth in a population-based sample of almost 8,000 mothers. The results indicated maternal cannabis use during pregnancy was associated with growth restriction in mid to late pregnancy and was also associated with lower birth weight of the fetus, which can be incredibly dangerous. Growth restriction for the fetus was most pronounced for those with continued use throughout her pregnancy. There was a significant nonlinear relationship between marijuana exposure and child intelligence. Heavy marijuana use, which is considered to be 1 or more cigarettes per day due to the high potency of today's marijuana, during the first trimester was associated with lower verbal reasoning scores on the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale. Other studies have demonstrated that prenatal marijuana exposure is associated with memory problems, executive functioning deficits that mirror autism, and higher rates of depression and anxiety. Another study suggests that cannabis use during pregnancy, either alone or in combination with smoking and exposure to secondhand smoke, was associated with an increased risk of stillbirth. This was a case control conducted by the Stillbirth Collaborative and attempted to include all stillbirths and representative live-born controls. Rather than relying solely on self-reporting, which can be flawed, this study collected and analyzed umbilical cord samples from births and made controls for illicit drugs. Maternal serum was also assayed for cotinine, a metabolite of nicotine, which is used as a biomarker for exposure to tobacco smoke. In this study, a positive cord test for any illicit drug was associated with about a 2-fold increase in risk of stillbirth. The most common individual drug shown was cannabis, although some of this effect may have been caused by smoking tobacco because some mothers would smoke both. Both maternal self-reported smoking history and maternal serum cotinine levels were associated in a dose-response relationship with stillbirth. Other studies have attempted to measure the consequence of prenatal marijuana use in terms of its effects on the behavioral and cognitive development of the exposed children. We know that the average IQ in America is decreasing. There is increasing evidence that the developing brain is exquisitely vulnerable and especially vulnerable to marijuana use. This is alarming because 7.3% of Americans 12 or older self-reported they regularly used marijuana in 2012, which is a huge increase from 5.8% of Americans in 2007. The majority of marijuana users in America are young and of reproductive age. Also concerning is that a growing number of people who view marijuana as a safer or more effective option than various medicines for the treatment of a variety of conditions, including nausea, vomiting, depression, and anxiety. At this point, there is no hard data to support the use of marijuana for the management of these symptoms. Pregnant women or women contemplating pregnancy are often told by their doctors to discontinue use of marijuana for medicinal purposes in favor of alternative therapies. Reflecting these concerns, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists issued a committee opinion on the use of marijuana in pregnant and nursing women, calling for OBGYNs to urge their patients who are pregnant or contemplating pregnancy to discontinue marijuana use. It should also be noted that even in states where marijuana is legalized, pregnant women who use marijuana have higher risks. In Colorado, where both medical and recreational marijuana are legal, the Department of Public Health and Environment still advises women not to use marijuana during pregnancy. If the baby tests positive for THC, the active ingredient of marijuana at birth, the law requires notification of Child Protective Services. While recent studies have suggested that cannabis use during pregnancy may pose risks to the developing fetus, less is known about the impact of cannabis on fertility in women and men, but it doesn't look good. Up until very recently, only 3 studies, the Cloniff-Cohen study in 2006, the Casman study in 2008, and the Wise study in 2008, examined the impact of marijuana use on fertility. 2 of the studies found no evidence that either partner's marijuana use affected the time to achieve pregnancy, but holes are being poked in these studies. The 3rd study, the Cloniff-Cohen study, looked at couples undergoing assisted reproduction, and they reported marijuana smoking was related to lower egg yield and lower fertilization rate. A recent study has looked at the impact of smoking marijuana in a group of infertile couples undergoing assisted reproduction. Participants, including the partners of 200 women, self-reported marijuana smoking at baseline. The study took place from 2004 to 2017 at a fertility center in Boston. So we know people are smoking marijuana even though they're trying to get pregnant or they are pregnant. Female marijuana users have about a 2-fold increase in risk of pregnancy loss. The finding is consistent with studies carried out in the general population. Cannabis use has been associated with testicular atrophy, low libido, laziness, sexual dysfunction, and lower levels of various hormones required for reproduction, including testosterone. In addition, cannabis use has been associated with reductions in sperm count, concentration, as well as abnormalities in sperm morphology, reductions in sperm motility and viability, and decreases in fertilizing capacity. This was of such concern that the University of Chicago Medical Center opened a new men's wellness clinic at the River East location to study this. With a nationwide boom in marijuana use, in Illinois alone, sales of recreational adult use marijuana topped $1.3 billion in 2021. University of Chicago medicine urologists looked into marijuana's impact on semen quality and male fertility. This study found marijuana use negatively impacted male fertility. The data showed current or past marijuana users had more damaged sperm, lower sperm counts, and reduced semen volume. In this July 2021 study of 409 young male patients seeking an infertility evaluation, the University of Chicago found that a certain part of the marijuana compound, CBD, had affinity to latch or bind to receptors on the sperm structure, altering its shape and function, which can ultimately decrease fertility in men. Interestingly, the negative impact on sperm function was seen in both current and past marijuana users. The study didn't establish how long men need to stop using marijuana in order to reverse this sperm function. According to the data in this study, marijuana decreased the volume of semen, sperm count, and altered the sperm's shape. The University of Chicago is expecting to do more studies on marijuana and men's fertility. It has been nearly a decade since the first time a majority of Americans supported legalizing cannabis. 2 years ago, that number reached a record high, according to Gallup, with 68% supporting marijuana legalization, a number that has held steady since. As the coronavirus, as the COVID pandemic engulfed the country in March 2020, medical marijuana businesses were declared essential, allowing them to remain open along with pharmacies and grocery stores. As the New York Times reported, it was official recognition that for some Americans, cannabis is as necessary as milk and bread. Even as the United States sees a huge decline in American births, not immigration, which skews population figures, the American government still pushes cannabis. Cannabis is one of the fastest growing industries in the United States. Sales of adult use of medical marijuana products hit $25 billion in 2021 and could reach $100 billion by 2030, according to Wall Street. 18 states have legalized cannabis for adult use, and another 19 currently have at least a comprehensive medical marijuana program subsidized by the taxpayer. As of 2020, 1 in 3 Americans lived in a state with access to legal marijuana, according to Politico, and that number is quickly growing as last year, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, and Virginia all passed adult use cannabis laws, joining Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont. Under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, marijuana remains classified as a Schedule I illegal drug with no medical uses, on par with heroin and LSD. The Drug Enforcement Agency strictly limits marijuana cultivation for research, who frustrates scientists who are unable to investigate its medical benefits and risks under current regulations. However, many academic institutions are able to study marijuana, and so it appears that the DEA role is for cultivation. Rescheduling marijuana for research was an often repeated promise of President Joe Biden's campaign, along with a pledge to decriminalize the use of cannabis and grant clemency to people with federal marijuana convictions. The vast majority of federal marijuana convictions in the United States were wiped, and it's very rare to see people convicted for just marijuana convictions. Typically, there are other crimes associated, whether it's for drug dealing, drug trafficking, or other drugs involved. States such as California offer farmers $100 million in subsidy for cannabis growth. Utah also offers a state-funded program, as do all the states with medical marijuana cards and shops. In Colorado, adults are allowed to possess up to 2 ounces of cannabis at a time. In California, the limit is 1 ounce. New York allows growing up to 6 plants per person at home, while New Jersey only allows licensed cultivators to grow. In 2021, Amazon announced its support for legislation to federally legalize marijuana and to end drug testing of its employees for cannabis. The updated policy was widely celebrated by, they're called reform advocates, but pro-marijuana lobbies, but also raised questions about whether the company was staking a claim to dominate the industry as soon as cannabis is legal under federal law. The company sells beer and wine through its Amazon grocery delivery services, but does not sell other regulated products like tobacco, and it's not clear how Amazon would sell cannabis since sale across state lines of this substance is prohibited by the federal government. Tax dollars aren't just spent subsidizing zoning and loans for CBD stores. The Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission implemented a social equity program that serves the individuals most impacted by marijuana prohibition, arrest, and incarceration by providing participants with free education and training for jobs in the cannabis industry. This program could serve as a model for other legal marijuana states. Other states that have incorporated social equity programs into adult use cannabis legislation, meaning the American taxpayer would pay for these additional social programs, include California, New Jersey, New York, New Mexico, Michigan, Vermont, Illinois, Connecticut, Arizona, and Virginia, as well as Washington, D.C. Under current federal law, cannabis businesses are subject to the same Internal Revenue Code statute enacted in 1982, which prevents smugglers from deducting expenses like guns and yachts from illicit operations. However, the IRS applies the same statute to state-authorized marijuana retailers due to marijuana being a drug, meaning that retailers aren't allowed to deduct many typical business expenses, including rent, marketing, payroll, and losses. This is where we see local and state governments step in and provide small business subsidy to pipe stores and marijuana gummy stores and marijuana stores. Where is most of the world's marijuana grown? America is not a leader in this field and does not reap the benefit from its own grown marijuana. In fact, California saw a surplus of marijuana a few years ago, and this caused a lot of issues for tax because one of the arguments lobbyists use is that the legalization of marijuana will bring in an incredible amount of tax revenue. Afghanistan, it supplies 10% of the world with marijuana, and this creates a lot of issues because Afghanistan is a war-torn country due to the war America imposed there. And so the issues around child labor, the issues around drug trafficking, the issues around drug running all exist in the marijuana industry. We see this because Colombia, Mexico, and India also rank in the top marijuana producers of the world. Morocco exports around 20% of the total hashish produced worldwide. Many of these countries are hubs for low-cost labor, using child labor, and ignoring environmental regulations. There's also the risk of drug trafficking and all of the issues that come with trafficking, from sex trafficking, human trafficking, to bribery, corruption of officials, to ensure that they retain their spot as top marijuana producers for the world. This exacerbates the issue that we see with American marijuana, where there is an incredible dearth of voices saying it's good for you, no big deal, you like getting high, don't you want to be high, it's legal now, it's no big deal, just light a blunt. How many characters do we see in television and movies that are high, and we're expected to accept being high in public places, whether that's marijuana shops, whether that's pipe shops, whether that's subsidizing these programs and companies, whether that's enabling use of marijuana on public transportation and then encountering secondhand smoke, which we know is very harmful to pregnant women. All of these issues are included in the marijuana topic in America today.